we'll go ahead and get started. First of all, good evening, everyone, and welcome. And thank you for joining us tonight to learn more about MTSS, or Multi-Tiered Systems of Support. And we'll start tonight by introducing ourselves. So my name is Lori Lopez, and I'm our Assistant Superintendent for Student Learning. And Angela, would you like to introduce yourself next?
Hi, I'm Angela Phillips. I'm the Assistant Director of Student Services.
And I'm Aubrey Holzbash. I'm one of the district school psychologists.
I'm Dr. Kevin Dwyer, Principal at Roosevelt Elementary School.
Hi, Alyssa Zamek. I'm a Special Education Coordinator at Roosevelt Elementary.
I'm Sarah Kwok. I'm a resource teacher at Franklin.
And I'm Dr. Leanne Frost. I'm Director of Student Services for the district.
And this presentation tonight actually shares information around 5 topics, and we'll provide an opportunity for questions at the end. So we'll start with an introduction to MTSS, and then we'll focus on the problem-solving method of decision-making. We'll address how data is used to inform instruction, and then we'll close by learning about the role of parents in the MTSS process, and also considerations for MTSS and special education.
All right, so we're going to get started with what MTSS is. So MTSS is a process. This process is designed so that the school focuses on struggling students to support them through high-quality, research-based, or evidence-based interventions. These interventions can be academic, behavioral, social. Interventions are focused to provide the student with the instruction in the specific area or areas that they need. We monitor progress often to check for effectiveness and to shape the instruction as the process moves forward. So MTSS is comprised of 3 parts. The first part is a model of supports, which we're going to talk about a little later in this presentation. This is having a problem-solving method of making decisions at each tier. And the third part is analyzing the data that is collected to inform instruction and intervention that occurs at each of the tiers.
There are 3 tiers of the multi-tiered systems of support. Tier 1 begins our core instruction provided to all students through our research-based curriculums and appropriate supports delivered by the general education teacher. Tier 2 begins targeted instruction and intervention that focuses on areas of need specific to an individual student or student group. And Tier 3 provides intensive instruction and intervention by individual needs and deficit areas. These 3 tiers will be further explained next. As we see here, we can see the 3 different tiers of support. Students may move fluidly among the tiers as a result of their response to the interventions and strategies they receive. For example, if data shows progress, a student can move from Tier 1 to Tier 2 and back to Tier 1 within a relatively short period of time. It is also important that students receive the types and levels of interventions and strategies they need when they need them. Accordingly, movement across the tiers is not necessarily sequential. For example, a student with significant gaps in performance may immediately require intensive Tier 3 interventions and would therefore not receive Tier 2 interventions prior to Tier 3. Data-based decision-making is a critical factor in examining need for support provided for students. District 64 uses a multitude of assessments, including, but not limited to, those listed here. This information allows staff to make decisions based on educational data and guide instructional practices.
And I'll jump in and talk about the problem-solving methods and decision-making process that's involved with what we're trying to do here. As you'll see on the screen, it will talk about 4 different steps to this this program in which we go about to problem solve. But and just giving you, I won't read off the screen, but let you look at that as I'm talking about it. We know good teaching involves differentiation for a student, to enrich students as needed, to support students as needed. Well, we can do that on a team level too. And grade level teams of teachers are sharing the responsibility for students' success. And they work together to problem solve and identify students who need extra enrichment or support. And to do that, they go through these decision and guiding questions to help the team through this process. This decision-making process involves, as it states on the screen here, to identify the problem, to analyze the problem, to monitor student progress along the way, to take some baseline data as a teacher, and then to come back as a team and use and collect that information to determine what other steps can be taken, and of course to develop and implement a plan. On the next slide, we take the process and we go a step further. And we want teams of teachers to come together and to have conversations about individual students. And it's a collaborative process. So many families and parents know that on Wednesdays we have early release. But for our faculty and staff, that means that we spend about 90 minutes after school every 6 or 8 weeks during the school year and designate those Wednesdays as problem-solving days. And during that time, teachers will look at universal screeners. Like in the last week or so, our students have been taking MAP testing. So we have those results available, and teams can come together during these times, look at that information, determine if there are any students who are outliers and would benefit from enrichment or support, and to go through those 4 problem-solving questions as we identified on the last screen. And take our students through through this process. But I just want to emphasize that it is a structured process and it is a collaborative process that involves administrators working in tandem with grade level teams of teachers. And now we'll go on to the next slide.
So when it comes to Tier 2 problem solving, it involves universal screening results, which are used to identify groups of students who have some risk of not meeting grade level standards and who have common needs. So some examples of the universal screening that parents might be familiar with in D64 would be the FastBridge results for some of our younger students, K through 2, or in 3rd grade and up, the measures of academic performance or the MAP tests. And when we're looking at students who might have some risk of not meeting those grade level standards, you might look or think of a student's performance kind of falling on a bell curve. So 50th percentile is considered solidly average, and anything really between that 25th to 75th percentile is considered average as well. So it's those students who might be falling under that kind of average range or below that 25th percentile that we might be looking at. And for those students, a data review team comes together. They're involved in the problem solving process at Tier 2, and they can be used for a group of students to identify research or evidence-based interventions or strategies that are proven to address specific skill needs for a group. Again, examples of that for District 64 might be something like LLI or leveled literacy intervention for our reading mastery foundations, or number worlds. And then students typically receive that Tier 2 intervention or strategy for a minimum of 12 to 16 weeks. So, and then at that Tier 3 level, the universal screening or progress monitoring data can show that some students might have larger gaps or skills. So at that point, the problem solving process is completed by an individual problem solving team. So that problem solving team is typically composed of the school principal, a special ed coordinator like Alyssa Zamek, the interventionist, and a psychologist like myself, who come together to kind of look at the data for those smaller groups of students or an individual student who might have more intense skill needs. And then with that tier 2, research or evidence-based interventions and strategies can be provided to address the needs of multiple students. And then some students may have specific skill needs that require that individualization. So in District 64, students typically receive a tier 3 intervention for at least 6 to 8 weeks. And so when thinking about that tier 3 or tier 2 interventions we can offer, sometimes that might look like a check-in, check-out system, or it might look like a behavior chart or a check-in connect.
So this next piece focuses on how we use data to inform instruction. In an MTSS model, as interventions and strategies get more intensive, then student progress is monitored more frequently. Knowing if student performance is improving helps guide our educational planning. So in the MTSS model, tools for universal screening are in line with the district's instructional materials and practices. Progress monitoring tools might vary across each of the tiers. And additionally, all of the screening and progress monitoring tools are research and evidence-based. But at tier 1, data is typically collected 3 times per year through universal screening, as we've discussed. There are established expectations for student performance at each grade level, and student performance is compared to these expectations to determine if the core curriculum is effective and if students are growing. At tier 2, another layer of instruction is added to support students. The data is typically collected then monthly to determine the impact of that instruction and to determine where instruction needs to be adapted. At tier 3, students are progress monitored typically weekly to determine the impact of these interventions, which are much more intensive. And again, we use the data to answer important questions. And these questions guide our lesson planning to support students. So we ask, is the student making progress? Are the current interventions and strategies helping the student learn in whatever the identified area is? We ask, is the student making enough progress to close the gap in the identified area? Or if the interventions and strategies are no longer provided, is the student able to continue to make progress? Or if not, can the current interventions and strategies be continued with only general education resources?
In this next section, you'll learn the role of a parent in the MTSS process. Within the different tiers, tier 1, 2, and 3, you can expect in the tier 1 that your child's classroom teacher will share any concerns or any data regarding universal screening in the areas of academics, behavior, or social skills. Your child's classroom teacher will share this concern with you and also inform you on how they are differentiating their instruction in the classroom to support your child. Within tier 2, a student data review team will review your child's data and help to create a small group plan with the help of an interventionist based on specific needs or even with a student service provider. Your role as a parent will be communicated. Your student's interventionist will communicate the plan with you, and you can also expect to receive progress monitoring reports from your interventionist and teacher. Within the tier 3 process, you will be involved in a meeting with the individual problem-solving team to create an individualized and intensive plan. You will also expect to receive progress monitoring reports from your child's interventionist or classroom teacher. Collaboration between the school and family is crucial to best support your child. Some suggestions to consider are to communicate with the school to find out what interventions are being used to address academic, behavior, or social concerns. Also to communicate regularly with your child's teacher. And then to ask the school about formal guidelines that they are using for progress monitoring. And then when possible, trying to use those same strategies that are occurring at school within the home setting. If your child is in the Tier 3 of MTSS, you will attend the individual problem-solving team meeting. You can also ask the school to provide you with regular progress monitoring reports so that you are informed of your child's progress. And then finally, also praise your child for any small or big improvements. It's really important to celebrate at home. And then also ask any questions when things are unclear.
I have one thought before we go into the MTSS and special education. Someone asked a question related to data, and I thought we might be able to just address this question now. I'm just pulling it up on my screen, and it's asking the group, is lack of growth an outlier even within grade level average? And I'll just jump in and invite anyone else on the panel to help answer the question too. But my first thought is, well, it depends. Parents should know that teams of teachers look at, I'm going to use MAP performance data as an example. We will look at trends over time for students. You know, by 4th and 5th grade, students who are taking the MAP test 2 and 3 times a year, there's a lot of data points to look on that. And so if we have a 5th grader who's performing low and hasn't made much growth, it would be important to see in the fall, has that been the trend in 4th grade and 3rd grade for this student too? Sometimes they have a summer slip, and we should take that into consideration and see if that's a general part of their pattern. Although if we're looking at scores from fall to spring, again, it depends. And teachers who work with this student and know the student all year long may be able to grasp that this student's performance is an outlier based on, depending on how they perform daily in class and through their trimester report cards. It's not consistent. So the answer I'm thinking is it really depends, and we have to take a broader look at that student and maybe how that student performs over time. But if anyone else wants to jump in on that question, please do so.
I think, Dr. Dwyer, you hit the nail on the head, just in terms of thinking about something like the MAP assessment or another universal screener being one source of data, right? So sometimes somebody may demonstrate tremendous growth on MAP, but in terms of their work performance in school or their school projects or school assessments, they're demonstrating that they're struggling or that they're facing some challenges. And so classroom teachers, I know, and principals are concerned about that when those data points don't match. So that's one of the things that we look at as well.
Okay, thank you. So we'll move on then to talk about how MTSS interacts with determining the need for special education eligibility. So once we have attempted interventions in Tier 3, we actually pose 2 questions. And these 2 questions will look at the intervention being delivered, the rate of student progress, and the necessity for sustained intense services. If the team answers yes to both of those questions, we will schedule a domain meeting with the parents. At the domain meeting, we will consider data that we have, data that we need, and who will collect the data. The completion of a domain document coupled with written consent from the parent will initiate an initial evaluation for special education eligibility. The school evaluation team will have 60 school days by which to complete the evaluation, schedule a meeting with the parents to review the results, determine special education eligibility, and if needed, develop an individualized education plan or an IEP. If the student is not eligible for special education, the team may discuss eligibility under 504 and/or continue the services of intervention. Just to review, eligibility for a 504 involves a student who has a physical or mental condition that substantially limits one or more of the student's major life functions or major bodily functions, and the student has a record of such an impairment or is regarded to having such an impairment. And because of the identified disabling condition, the student is in need of accommodations, adaptations, and/or related services. If a student meets the criteria for a 504, a plan will be developed and implemented. If you would like more information on the district's 504 process, it can be found on the Special Education Parent Resource page on the district website. So this concludes our presentation on District 64's MTSS process. We have identified additional resources for you on this page, on the last page prior to the thank you page. On that page is also at the bottom a guidance document that we've created. We will place this presentation as well as the audio recording from this presentation and the parent guidance document on our web pages. We hope to have those up soon for additional people who were not able to join us tonight to view and to refer to at a date fairly soon. So with that, if there are any other questions.
I think there's one other question. I can read it for the panel. When my child is in intervention, what is he or she missing out while the general ed classroom, in particular kindergarten? I've asked both the kindergarten teacher and interventionist this question, and the answer is they are doing similar instruction. However, my child continues to get work in Seesaw that general ed peers are working on, and the work my child is doing in intervention is different, enough for me to worry about the gaps getting bigger. I'm not worried about Seesaw, but missing instruction.
Go ahead, Dr. Dwyer.
I was just going to jump in and share that anytime that we are pulling a child for intervention and removing them from instruction in the classroom, there is a separation there. And we do try and pull students at the very best time in which there's no new teaching going on, or in which we're not teaching core subjects like reading or math. And it is a fair conversation to have with your child's classroom teacher to determine what they're missing. But I think interventionists or a team that determines that there is a need there and this additional instruction and high intensity instruction will ultimately, for the long road, benefit that child. And if anything, give them more confidence when they come back into the classroom, because we are working on an area that's difficult for them, or they may struggle and they have to take some risks in doing that. But the hope is that in the short term, there'll be some sacrifice involved here, and we need to be transparent about that. But in the long run, I hope skills are going to be refined and improved and give the child more confidence and better performance in the classroom. That should be the result.
So in addition to that, we have an expression at the elementary schools that in the earlier grades, right, in kindergarten and first grade and second grade, students are learning to read, but in the grades after that, they're reading to learn. So reading really becomes the skill that unlocks almost every other subject area for students. So I would echo what Dr. Dwyer says in that it's just a matter of competing priorities right now. And if children are receiving intensive instruction in foundational skills that they can leverage for learning in other areas, the early grades are the time to really do that. And if there are things that are being assigned, for example, through Seesaw, sometimes the kids get upset because they don't like to not turn things in or complete their assignments. But that's a good conversation to have with classroom teachers about excusing students from that work so that they don't feel overwhelmed by it. Are there additional thoughts or questions from any of our guests? Well, we want to thank everyone for coming out tonight. And obviously, if something comes to you, if a question comes to you and you're looking for an answer, you can contact me tomorrow, Lori Lopez. I'm at the ESC, or Dr. Frost would also be happy to answer your questions. And I know our building principals are also available to discuss anything related to MTSS. But we appreciate everyone reaching or joining us tonight virtually. And we hope you have a fantastic evening.